Welcome to Transforming and Thriving
with best friends Brooke, Stacie, and Nelia.
Podcast dedicated to women sharing their inspirational stories. Hey everyone, we're so excited to share some big news. We're kicking off our very first philanthropy initiative to give back to our community. We're partnering with the Wellness and Prevention Center in South Orange County, an incredible group supporting youth and families with mental health services. They've just opened an Alcove Center in San Juan Capistrano, California, which is a safe space where young people between 12 to 25 years old can find support for their mental health, connect with peers, and get guidance with school or work. Here's how you can help. We'll be matching up to $1,000 in donations from our listeners. Every dollar goes directly to creating brighter futures for local youth. Check out the link in our show notes to donate, follow WPCOC on Instagram, and learn more at alcove.org. That's ALLCOVE.org. Together, we can make a real difference. Hey there, everyone. We are so excited to be here for another episode. I'm Stacie.
And I'm Brooke. I am so happy to be joined today by someone who's not only an incredible professional, but also a great friend of mine, Katie Estberg. She and I met when we were doing some work in ABA together. And what started out as a professional connection quickly grew into a meaningful and ongoing friendship, really rooted in shared values, curiosity, and a deep commitment to helping others. Katie's one of those hardworking and creative people who you just get so many great ideas from, and her energy is just really contagious. She's super intelligent, and did I mention she's hardworking? She brings so much warmth, thoughtfulness, and heart into everything she does. More professional info on Katie. She's a powerhouse. She is a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology, a board-certified behavior analyst, and a clinician trained in both dyadic developmental psychotherapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. She's also an integrative healing practitioner, blending neuroscience, evidence-based therapies, and holistic modalities to support deep emotional transformation. Katie brings a truly unique, compassionate approach to mental health care, drawing on tools such as EMDR, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, hypnosis, Reiki, psychopharmacology, internal family systems, and even past life regression. Her work focuses on trauma recovery, emotional regulation, and guiding individuals back to their true selves. With both clinical insight and intuitive wisdom, Katie's mission is all about creating space that's safe, supportive, where healing can truly unfold, bridging science and soul to empower lasting, meaningful change. Katie, I'm really grateful and honored to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are so excited to have you here today. And just on a personal note, hearing that whole introduction, there's like so many questions I have for you professionally, and I want to hear more about everything you're doing. And it sounds fascinating, and some of which I have experience with personally and professionally. So yeah, I'm super jazzed to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's been a day, juggling kids and job and all of that, but I am big on finding balance, and I think that's what we're all trying to find.
Yes. It's a constant struggle, constant search to find more balance, especially when juggling all the things and family and personal, professional. Well, we're grateful to have you here and, taking the time. I know it sounds like you have a very busy life and lots of responsibilities and people and things pulling you in different directions. So, I know it takes a lot to show up for something else. So if it's okay, let's just dive right in. What is a major transition or life event you experienced that you feel marked somewhat of a before and after in your life?
When I thought about this, I was really trying to reflect because I am different from, even from meeting Brooke. I mean, it was a while ago. Being a clinician and using EMDR, in order to do EMDR, you have to do your own. And I really didn't want to. I really was like, I'm great, I'm good. But we had to. And so I went and reprocessed an event that happened a couple of years ago. And it brought everything together for me and this feeling of being alone. I have two small boys, and in between those, I had a miscarriage. And it was, I mean, I think all miscarriages are traumatic, but I was 17 weeks pregnant. And so at that point, I felt like I was good, and it's after 13 weeks where you're in this clear spot. And that was the lowest point of, like, I'm not a depressed person and I'm very optimistic, but that took me down. And it's not just the it's the loss of that hope. It's the not just the loss of that life, but, you're thinking about, we already knew the gender, we already knew the name, all of those things, and then I have other children, and so having to tell them, and so that was all very difficult. And then through the EMDR in training, you have to do this training, and then you have a couple months where you're supposed to be practicing it with clients, and then you come back and do the training again. And so you have this little cohort. And the lady that I did it with, her name was also Katie. But you feel so safe in that situation that she took me back, and the connection that I made between that loss was being 3 years old and being in my room by myself because my mom was at the hospital having my brother. And so my dad was not, like, emotionally available. And so I was alone in both of these situations. And as my adult self, I wasn't alone. I had my very supportive husband, I had my other kids, I had friends and family, but nobody can sit with me in that pain. Even people that have experienced that, there wasn't anybody at that moment in that. And so that connection for me to being 3 years old and really emotionally and physically being alone, that's why I love EMDR. And that's what has brought me to this place that I am today, and such an advocate for it. And while I know that all these modalities that I have, they aren't for everybody. I'm building a toolbox, and here's the charcuterie board of modalities, pick which you want. But I feel that EMDR, the first couple of phases, like, there's a history taking, but then there's a resourcing phase. And I feel like the resourcing for me is just like meditation and creating that safe space and feeling those feelings of love, and all of that. And I just have so many wonderful stories with my clients that it has made such an impact. And I'm able to bring that to them because I know that it's had an impact, because that was definitely an impactful event for me. But then being able to start that healing and be able to share that experience, because there's so many things like that where we feel it's too heavy to share, and we keep it to ourselves and just hold on to it, and that's not healthy either.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you went through is such a huge loss and so heartbreaking. And like you said, no matter what stage of your pregnancy you're in, it is incredibly difficult. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I can relate personally. I also have experienced a miscarriage, and, there's a lot of complex emotions
Mm,
surrounding this. And it's a lot
mhm,
more common than I think we talk about.
for
And
sure.
as you mentioned, even for our partners, it's a lot that we handle in silence. And
Mhm,
like you said, grief isn't just about the loss itself. There's, this loss of like hope and the future, and all of these things shift.
mhm.
It's a lot to carry. So I would love to hear more about what you went through after your miscarriage and the courage it took for you to get pregnant again. For me, after my miscarriage, trying to get pregnant again came with such a mix of fear and anxiety and hope. I wanted to be a mother so badly, and so it was worth it, but it was so challenging to face these fears, like, head on. I was lucky enough to get pregnant again, and I'm incredibly grateful, to be currently pregnant. And there's just this feeling, though, that you can't fully relax.
Mhm,
Every milestone, doctor's visit, it's kind of feels like you're holding your breath a little bit. Now I'm 28 weeks, and so some of that fear is eased up, but I've also felt these waves of fear and joy and, everything in between. So I know so many women out there who have experienced loss can relate to this complex mix of feelings. And, if you're listening out there and going through it yourself, I just want you to know you aren't alone. And, Katie, I would love to hear from you when you were trying to conceive and then, getting pregnant after your loss. What was that like for you?
Well, they say once you've had a miscarriage, like it's easier to get pregnant or whatever. But this time it was like, is this even what I should be doing? I have other children. Is this, a sign I'm not supposed to? But I just think it was something that I had to go through in order to do things like this episode or, that my therapy clients that like it was something that I had to experience. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and it was so shocking. It was nobody anticipates this is gonna happen, and even if you've had miscarriages before, for me, I was past the point where I should have been, air quotes, like, safe. So, it was for me making sure that I had mourned the loss of not only this life, but this perceived future that I had because I went through something very traumatic in all aspects and just kind of had to go through it feeling helpless at times but I knew once I had gone and done some of my work I was able to know this was meant to be and I am supposed to try again and so even getting to that point, I wasn't concerned about getting pregnant, but like you said, every doctor's appointment, like there's always that twinge of worry or concern that keeps you from feeling that complete joy. Or we feel that moment of joy and then we come back to like, okay, well, don't get too excited or, because we know what the other side of that feels like.
Right? Just like letting yourself be vulnerable and completely feel
Mhm.
the excitement and joy, which you want to. And I said earlier, every pregnant woman, regardless of if you've had a miscarriage or not, goes through the worry,
Mhm.
of course. Almost seems to be this extra layer if you have experienced some loss,
Mhm.
if you've had a miscarriage. And it does take a lot of courage to go through that again. Did you have people around you when you were going through that experience of loss that supported you?
Definitely, like, my husband was very supportive, my kids, they were all there, but, it's kind of like a fog over you, like a big heavy blanket, and not in a comforting way, but, just like this
Mhm.
cloud of pain and darkness, and so it's like they're there and I know they were there, but they weren't able to, like, penetrate that for a little bit, like, I just had to sit in this and feel it and, feel the hurt and the loss and all of that before I was able to even accept that support really. Not that I was, not accepting hugs and, all of that, but it's like this was a process of my own. Like I'm the only one that had to live through this in that way. Yes, my husband had to deal with it. My kids had to deal with the loss of all of this so, yes, I had supportive people, but I had to process it in a different way than everybody else, and their support and knowing that they were there when I was ready, I think was instrumental in my being able to bounce back and get to the place where I could go through therapy and be okay and, get to the point where I was ready to try again and all of that. I think as human beings, we need that connection and we need that support, but we have to start with ourselves.
Right, absolutely. And I'm so glad that there's these resources that you were already tapped into to a certain extent and dove into a little bit more. And I'd love to hear some more about that.
Yeah, because now that you mention it, I was pregnant. It wasn't that long after. It was maybe a year later that I was doing the training. So, divine timing and all that jazz as far as that's what I needed for, not just my healing, but for the healing of my next baby.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more. I know you've shared about how the experience of learning about EMDR more and training in that really kind of helped you initially. I'm curious, I guess first let me take a step back. For listeners who don't know what EMDR is, could you maybe give explanation of, in layman's terms what it is? And then I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what that experience was like for you initially with EMDR and how it helped you kind of make these links and helped you to begin to heal. Sorry, that was a lot of questions wrapped into one.
Yeah. I'll try to get everywhere. Remind me if I forget something. But EMDR, it's been around since the early 1980s. Dr. Shapiro, she came across it while walking in the park and having her eyes go back and forth. And it is similar to REM sleep as far as our eye moving back and forth. So the bilateral stimulation. So there's 8 phases of EMDR. One is the history taking, what either traumas, what are the symptoms, whatever that is, and then going through and like I said, the resourcing part of it, making sure that we have a safe place or a safe person, because what we don't want is for people to become flooded, which is like we're taking on too much emotion. We're reprocessing. So it's eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. But there's different ways to do it. And everybody kind of does it a little bit differently. I feel like it's just like any therapy where you find your thing and that's what you do. Some people use a light bar in order for the eyes to go back and forth. Some people can just do, butterfly hugs where you're tapping each shoulder. And sometimes with kids, I'll use drumsticks that light up so that they're getting that bilateral stimulation. My EMDR consultant, she does a lot of art with hers where you're either coloring or painting to get that bilateral stimulation. I personally have little, I call them buzzies, but you hold them and they vibrate in your hands. And so with that, you go through and it helps your brain make new connections. And so that's stage 2 is preparation, resourcing. 3 is the assessment. So you go through what memories we have. And sometimes I have clients that don't have a vivid memory, it's just a felt sense. And so we'll go into that tightness in their chest or whatever negative belief they have, whatever they're holding on to. And phase 4 is desensitizing it with the bilateral stimulation. I will have clients kind of try different ways, but like a lot of my resourcing is using my little buzzies and they hold them and then I take them on a meditation to a safe place or, whatever. Cause a lot of my clients come and they're like, I don't know how to meditate. I'm not good at it. And it just really helps. I'm a very tactile person. And so for me, like even like I have to go to sound baths or like different things in order to really drop into meditation. It's really hard for me to just sit here and say I'm going to meditate. So 4 is desensitizing. It's getting all the ick out. It's feeling it. You're figuring out, well, the way I was trained, the earliest memory or the most intense one. And you put it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most intense. And so usually that is part of the history taking for me, is figuring out what's going to create the most relief. And then making sure that they can hold that much. Like I said, I don't want them to get flooded I deal with a lot of complex trauma. And so it's not just one thing. Sometimes I have where it's clients that it's, a shooting or a rape, but then even that can be tied back to something. So stage 4 is desensitizing. Like I said, just getting that ick out of the body. So I've had clients where after a rape, if they still were in contact with the offender or they saw them or whatever the case may be, it would cause a lot of anxiety. And then being able to reprocess it, they didn't feel that anymore. And then the next phase is installation. So, whatever that negative belief is, I'm not safe, I deserved it. And so then putting in that positive, I equate it to like a record player. And so we have this memory of this situation, and we're just going to put this new record on top to play with this memory. And so it's, I'm safe now, or whatever they need to believe about this event to not have this negative belief anymore. Stage 6 is the body scan, just clearing any residual disturbance in the body, scanning again, seeing if anything's left. And then 7 is, closing it, making sure that they're in a calm state. And then 8 is reevaluating, checking treatment's effectiveness. So that's a very long overview of the the 8 stages.
Thank you for breaking that down. No, that's super helpful. And I actually have experienced EMDR for processing some things in my life, and I use the buzzies. That's what they had me. I didn't actually know that they have like lights and like you mentioned drums for children. That's really cool that there's different ways to tap into that bilateral.
Mhm.
It's called the bilateral movement, right?
Yeah, even my EMDR consultant, there's a YouTube video that I give to a lot of my clients. It's, obviously YouTube, so it's free, but it's just music and it helps with anxiety, but it's you put I tell them to put in their ear pods or whatever, and it's that same bilateral thing. It goes in one ear and the other. So I think it's really good for meditation and all of that too.
Yeah, I loved how you talked about how for some people it isn't just, oh, I'm going to meditate and I sit there, and there's some things that needed to be added or space that you need to create in order for that to be effective for you. So I loved how you touched on that as well. And earlier you mentioned how EMDR helped you uncover this deep connection between the miscarriage and your earlier experience of being alone. What was it like for you to discover that link between the two?
I was so weirded out. I was like, there's no way I remember that. But I did. I remembered my wallpaper in my room. I remember my nightlight being on. It is amazing because, obviously, in our development at that point, I was verbal. So it's still an explicit memory. But I have had other clients where they can go into the womb and, and get those implicit memories and all of that. It's wild. Our brains are just so amazing and they want to help us, but our brains also want to organize things, and sometimes they get wires crossed and they put it in the wrong filing cabinet. And so for me, it's like EMDR is being able to kind of clear out that filing cabinet, put it where you want it to go. And so for me to make that connection, I couldn't, because I was definitely one of those people at that point in my life where I'm like, meditating, who does that? Who has time for that? But then to find this way that I can do it, and it just really opened my, like, I don't even know how to express, but it just kind of opened me up and opened up both my eyes and my mind. And so it really helped me reconnect to myself, and knowing that that feeling of being alone, that's what that was. And that's what was keeping me tethered to things that didn't feel safe. And so me being able to identify that, it opened doors for me and made me able to move forward, and then being able to help others too.
That's pretty amazing. And I love how like candid you were about how meditating was this thing that was so difficult for you, or that you just like, why would I can't even, and how everyone responds differently to different things, right? And so I can relate to the I have a hard time just sitting and meditating. I need to move, or I need to have a different experience first before I can actually drop in. What you've shared about that feeling of isolation that you were able to connect to, and that feeling of isolation that you can experience during grief. I think that's so common, and to be able to actively create a space where people don't feel alone and can connect these different parts of themselves and kind of like you said rewire their brain or put the files back into the cabinet in the proper space. That's such a gift. How do you approach holding that space for others in your practice now, especially when you're dealing with such tender experiences like loss and complex trauma?
Honestly, I feel like I also do grief circles, and so that's outside of the private practice that I'm at, just in the wellness community. And I think the biggest thing with that, so a lot of people come and they're dealing with loss of loved ones or grieving a parent that's ill or whatever the case may be. And it's interesting because it's changing our future. It's changing what life has been. And it's not that there's not hope, it's just now we're having to adapt. But for me, like, that's what life is. And that's what I love working with my clients, because I want them to know that they can surf the waves of life and, ebb and flow with it. And if you can do that and find the joy and the peace, then you can deal with the lows. And so being able to bring them back to the time of feeling just a flicker of joy or a moment of peace, Like, that's what we're all here for. We're not here to be miserable. Like, nobody wants that. I think reminding ourselves of what brings us those moments of clarity where whether we're finding our purpose or whatever it is. And that's what I loved in ABA too. It was the light bulb moments, the moments where people were like, oh, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. I remember now. It's, if we don't know our why, then it's not something worth doing, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's so important to have some sort of, we talk about like anchor or your fuel, right? The thing that's moving you. And some people fall away from that and have trouble getting back to finding just even the basic joy, as you mentioned, especially if there's trauma, like not to mention just daily life, right? The daily
Sure.
life and the grind is hard. But
Mhm.
if you've had trauma or a significant life event, it can be sometimes become even more difficult to tap back into that joy. So having the space to be able to just spend time with what brings me joy. What do I like? What are the things that fill my day? Even
Mhm.
the simplest of things. So that's super, super important. Thank you. As far as this loss and your healing process, how do you feel like this has shaped you as an individual, a mother, clinician? How do you feel like this experience has shaped you?
I didn't realize how angry I was about being alone. And I think as, women too, well, not that we're not allowed to be angry, but kind of, like it's like that the dark feminine. So I harbored a lot of resentment and I have a lot of clients, whether they're male or female, they come because of anger. They want to be medicated because they can't regulate their emotions or, whatever the case may be. And that all resonates with me because I am the oldest in my family, so there's some roles within that, some expectations, and I carried all that. And then to have this loss come and it just I don't want to say it shattered me, but it brought me to a low where I had to like it shook me and be like, is this it? Is this what I want? And I think having my other kids, it helped me to like reassess quickly and, get back to a baseline. But then from there, just continuing to keep going and being able to let go of the anger, the things that I held on to. There was a lot 16-year-old Katie was really pissed off. And so not having control and just so many parts of all of that. And a lot of the work that I do is identifying those ages because I see with all of my behavioral background, I see our development as like a staircase. And so I want to go back to the step where we took on this belief. So that helps me professionally, but it also, I think, helps me assess where I'm at. What am I needing right now? And figuring out how to meet all of those needs, not just for my kids, but being able to fill up my cup. Before we got on here, I went swimming because I needed that's my meditation majority of the time because I'm able to listen to my audiobooks and, go swim and do that. And I know that I need to do that at least once a week. And it's so again, it's just all finding balance because burnout's not working and figuring out if I do get frustrated or, something comes up, taking a breath, figuring out, am I tired? Am I hungry? And what is underlying all of that? What of my needs are not being met? And what can I do about it in that moment for myself? Because that is what allows me to be able to help everybody else. I tell my clients all the time, you can't pour from an empty cup, but it's not just about filling your cup. In order to give either to kids, to others, then your cup has to be overflowing in order to be able to give to others.
So true. So true. And I love that you touched on the anger because I think that's something that just isn't talked about enough. That's a part of the grieving process when you're finally addressing or working through major traumas or things that you've gone through in your life or loss. Like a lot of times that anger can come up. And I love how you mentioned just the filling up your own cup and how important that is. And that's awesome that you went swimming before we met. For listeners who might be navigating their own unique challenges, particularly those experiencing, grief or profound loss or trauma, what advice would you give them to stay resilient and find their path?
I think for anybody, it's like nobody has to live your life. Nobody has to live in your body. I think we get very stuck in what we need to do for others or to make others happy. But what about ourselves? And if you want something different, you have to do something different. So if you are grieving or you're pissed off or you're sad or whatever it is, it's what are we doing? You're being called to sit down and figure out what's not working. And it's spending time with yourself. And I think so many of us are living for other people, but we have to live for ourselves too.
That is so, so true and so helpful. I love that you said if we want something different, we have to do something different. It's so simple and that's so true. And like you said, creating that space and what do you want to be different in your life? Very, very simple, but very powerful. Thanks for sharing that. I know that you are working on a lot of different things. We want people to be able to find you. I know you've got an Instagram and some different groups that you do. So would you mind just sharing briefly where can people find you and what are some of the couple of things you're working on?
Oh man. So I am working with an LMFT and we're making our own like tarot card deck and oracle card deck. I actually pulled up one with a client today. It's just, they're so beautiful and I love them. I'm also biased, but so I can be found at magic underscore over matters on Instagram. I also at magicovermatters.co. I also have a Stan store. So Stan, STAN dot store, and then backslash Katie Estberg. But so I think the cards are the thing most at the forefront. But a lot of these things that we were talking about and, people feeling alone and, mother wounds and father wounds. And I'm going to be doing a lot of workshops and courses and things of that nature. I am called to create community and help people heal. And I just hear so much, not just from COVID, but I know before then, but I think it's been really brought to the forefront of everybody's mind of how important connection is and being human. And so being able to do that and come to a space where we're not alone, we're not weird, we're accepted for who we are and can say what we want and live in alignment and all be happy and peaceful and joyful.
I love all of that, and I will put everything in the show notes for people so they know where to find you. I can't wait to see your tarot card deck. And yeah, just thank you for being here and sharing your story and just being so open and honest. And I think a lot of the specific advice and suggestions and encouragement that you shared will touch so many people. And I appreciate you sharing a little bit more about EMDR. I also have my own personal experience with it, but I think it's great to be able to just break it down in all those steps for people who are completely new to it and maybe wanting to learn more or go on their own journey with it. So, yeah, thanks again for being here today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
To all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of Transforming and Thriving. We'll be back every other Monday with more inspiring stories. Please follow us on your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram so you can be a part of this community and stay up to date with each episode. Feel free to leave a review so that we can get your valuable feedback and other people can find these powerful stories. We're all in this crazy life together, so let's move through it together. See you there.